My mother-in-law tried to bleach my baby's skin while babysitting because she was ashamed of his. I am Charlotte, 32 years old, and proudly African American. When I married James, who is white, we created our beautiful brown-skinned baby Lucas. At 8 months old, his smile could light up the darkest room. I thought having my mother-in-law Eleanor watch him while I worked was a blessing. I never imagined the person I trusted would harm my precious child in such an unforgivable way. Before I share the horrifying day that changed everything, let me know where you are listening from and hit subscribe if you believe protecting our children is the most sacred duty we have as parents. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Philadelphia. Both my parents were educators who instilled in me a deep pride in our heritage. My father taught African American history at the local high school, while my mother was an elementary school principal. Our home was filled with books, art, and conversations about our culture and the importance of education. They raised me to be confident in my skin and proud of my ancestry. Never let anyone make you feel less than because of who you are, my mother would always say. Those words became my foundation as I navigated through predominantly white schools and eventually college. I met James during my junior year at university. We were both studying business administration, and we connected instantly during a group project. His analytical mind complemented my creative thinking, and soon our study sessions turned into coffee dates, then dinner dates, and eventually love. James was different from anyone I had dated before. He listened, really listened when I talked about my experiences as a Black woman in America. He never dismissed my feelings or tried to explain away the microaggressions I faced. Instead, he sought to understand and support me. When we first started dating, I worried about the challenges we might face. I told my friend Aisha over lunch one day. But James made me feel seen and respected in ways I never expected. Our relationship blossomed despite the raised eyebrows and occasional stares we received in public. We were happy in our bubble, but eventually it was time to meet the families. My parents welcomed James with open arms. They were cautious at first, concerned about how the world would treat us, but they saw how he looked at me, how he valued me, and that was what mattered most to them. As long as he treats you with respect and stands by your side, we support you, my father said after meeting James for the first time. Meeting James's family was an entirely different experience. They lived in a suburban neighborhood where diversity was something people claimed to value but rarely experienced firsthand. The awkward silence when I walked into their home for the first time spoke volumes. Eleanor, James's mother, greeted me with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was polite, excessively so, in that way people are when they are uncomfortable but trying not to show it. "Charlotte, what lovely hair you have," she commented during that first dinner, reaching out as if to touch my curls before stopping herself. "How do you manage it?" There were other comments too subtle but pointed. Questions about my family, my neighborhood, all asked with a tone that suggested surprise when my answers did not match her preconceptions. James noticed my discomfort on the drive home. "My mom can be a bit awkward sometimes," he apologized. "She means well, she just doesn't have much experience with people from different backgrounds." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Eleanor simply needed time to adjust, to see me as a person, not just a color. Over the next few years, our relationship with his family improved marginally. Eleanor became less overtly uncomfortable, though her comments about my appearance or background never fully ceased. James always defended me, always stood by my side, which is why I agreed to marry him, despite my reservations about his family. Our wedding was beautiful, but tense. My side of the church was vibrant with color and joy, while his side sat stiffly in their formal attire, smiling politely but rarely mingling with my relatives. Eleanor wore a beige dress that she described as neutral, though the color choice felt symbolic somehow. After the wedding, we settled into married life in a diverse neighborhood halfway between our family homes. James worked at a marketing firm while I built my career as a graphic designer. We were happy, focused on our careers and each other. 2 years into our marriage, we decided to start trying for a baby. I was nervous about bringing a child into a world that would view them as neither fully black nor fully white. But I also knew our love would provide a strong foundation. The day I found out I was pregnant remains one of the happiest of my life. James lifted me off the ground and spun me around our living room when I showed him the positive test. "We're going to be parents," he kept repeating, tears in his eyes. "We're going to have a family." We called my parents first, who whooped with joy and immediately began planning all the things they would teach their grandchild about their heritage. Then we called James's parents. "Oh, that's wonderful news," Eleanor said, her voice carefully modulated. After a pause, she added, "Do you think the baby will look more like James or more like you?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear. I chose to ignore it, but it was the first of many such comments throughout my pregnancy. "I wonder what color the baby's hair will be," she would muse during visits, or, "I had the palest skin as a baby James too." Family trait. Each comment was a small paper cut, stinging, but not enough to cause a real confrontation. James would redirect the conversation or gently chide his mother, but he never saw the pattern for what it was: obsession with our child's appearance, with how black they would look. Lucas arrived after 20 hours of labor, 7 pounds 4 ounces of perfection. He had my brown skin, a shade lighter than mine, but unmistakably brown, with a cap of dark curls. And his father's green eyes, a beautiful blend of both our features. I fell in love instantly, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness that surged through me as I held him. James was equally smitten, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the life we had created together. Eleanor and her husband Richard came to the hospital the next day. Her face, when she first saw Lucas, is something I will never forget. A flash of something disgust, disappointment crossed her features before she arranged her expression into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He looks healthy," she said, not reaching for him when I offered to let her hold him. "His skin might lighten up as he gets older, you know. James was quite tan when he was born, too." James, exhausted from the sleepless night and overwhelmed with new parenthood, either didn't notice or chose not to address the comment. I was too tired to argue, but I tucked the moment away, a warning flag I should have heeded more carefully. As the weeks passed and we settled into life with Lucas, Eleanor began to visit more frequently. She would bring gifts, pastels, and blues, never the vibrant colors that my mother selected. She started to make comments about his hair, suggesting products to manage the curls, as if they were a problem to be solved rather than a beautiful part of who he was. "Have you considered straightening it when he gets older?" she asked once when Lucas was just 4 months old. "It might be easier for him." "Easier for who?" I responded, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "His hair is perfect exactly as it is." The comment led to our first real argument about Eleanor, with James defending his mother. "She just doesn't know any better," he insisted. "She's from a different generation." I wanted to believe that was true. I wanted to believe that Eleanor just needed time to love Lucas for exactly who he was. I couldn't have been more wrong. After 6 months of maternity leave, it was time for me to return to work. We discussed childcare options, weighing the pros and cons of daycare versus in-home care. "My mother could watch him," James suggested one evening as we were going through our finances. "She retired last year and mentions wanting to spend more time with Lucas whenever we visit." I hesitated. While Eleanor had never done anything overtly harmful, her constant commentary on Lucas's appearance made me uncomfortable. But daycare was expensive, and having a family member watch him would mean more individual attention. "Are you sure she'd be up for it?" I asked. "It's a lot of work watching an active baby all day." "She raised 3 of us," James reminded me. "And she adores Lucas." Did she, though? I had never seen Eleanor fully embrace Lucas the way my parents did. She held him stiffly, rarely cooing or playing with him the way grandparents typically did. But perhaps more time together would strengthen their bond. "Let's try it," I finally agreed. 3 days a week to start, and we can reevaluate after a month." James was thrilled and called his mother immediately. Eleanor accepted with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, arriving the following Monday precisely at 7:30, prepared with a notebook for instructions and schedules. "I want to do this right," she assured me, a new determination in her eyes that I mistook for dedication to her grandmother role. The first few weeks seemed to go smoothly. Lucas was always fed, changed, and generally content when I returned from work. Eleanor kept meticulous notes about his eating and napping schedule, and even sent me occasional photos throughout the day. But small things began to bother me. Lucas, who had always loved bath time, started crying when I put him in the water. His skin seemed more sensitive, often appearing red and irritated, particularly after days with Eleanor. "It's just the heat," Eleanor explained when I mentioned it. "The sun was streaming through the nursery window today. I've started keeping the blinds drawn." I accepted this explanation initially, but the irritation persisted even on cloudy days. When I mentioned it to our pediatrician during a routine checkup, she asked if we had changed any products recently, soap, detergent, lotion. "Not that I know of," I answered, then hesitated. "Though my mother-in-law has been watching him 3 days a week. I suppose she could be using something different." The doctor recommended switching to hypoallergenic products for a week to see if it helped. I mentioned this to Eleanor, who nodded agreeably. Of course, whatever the doctor thinks is best. But Lucas's skin issues continued. In fact, they seemed worse on the days Eleanor watched him. I started noticing dry patches on his cheeks and arms, and he became increasingly fussy during diaper changes, as if his skin was tender to the touch. Around this time, my coworker and friend, Aisha, invited me to lunch. As we caught up, I mentioned my concerns about Lucas's skin issues and Eleanor's care. Aisha frowned, setting down her fork. My cousin had a similar issue with her mother-in-law watching her daughter. Turned out the woman was using some kind of old-school home remedy on the baby's skin without permission. Something about making her complexion better. A chill ran down my spine. "You don't think Eleanor would?" "I'm not saying that's what's happening," Aisha clarified quickly. "But if you're worried, maybe set up a nanny cam, just for peace of mind." The suggestion made me uncomfortable. It felt like a violation of trust, a step toward the kind of toxic in-law relationship I had always hoped to avoid. I mentioned it to James that evening, couching it in terms of general security rather than specific suspicion. "I was thinking we should get one of those baby monitor cameras," I said casually. "You know, the kind you can check from your phone throughout the day." James looked up from his laptop. "Is something wrong? Has my mom said anything concerning—" "No, nothing like that," I lied, not wanting to voice my suspicions without evidence. "I just miss Lucas during the day. It would be nice to peek in and see what he's up to." James seemed skeptical, but eventually agreed. We purchased a small camera that we placed on the bookshelf in Lucas's nursery, angled to capture the changing table and crib. I showed Eleanor how to use it, explaining that it was for our peace of mind and would allow us to check in on Lucas throughout the day. Eleanor smiled tightly. "Of course, though I hope you know you can trust me with my own grandson." I assured her it wasn't about trust, but the comment lingered in the air between us, a small crack in the facade of our relationship. I noticed that after that day, the camera frequently ended up pointed at the ceiling or wall, Eleanor claiming that she must have bumped it while tending to Lucas. Around this time, I also began to notice Eleanor bringing her own bag of supplies, tote filled with diapers, wipes, and various bottles and tubes that she kept close to her. "I picked up some special baby soap and lotion," she explained when I asked. "Hypoallergenic, like the doctor suggested. It's a brand my mother used for James when he was a baby." I should have checked those products then. I should have insisted on knowing exactly what she was putting on my child's skin. Instead, I nodded and thanked her for being so thoughtful, ignoring the unease that continued to build. The first real warning came when I was doing laundry one evening and emptied Eleanor's tote, looking for burp cloths she had mentioned washing. At the bottom of the bag, I found a small, unmarked bottle with a handwritten label I couldn't quite make out. When I asked Eleanor about it the next morning, she quickly took it from my hands. "Just an old family remedy for diaper rash," she said, tucking it away. "Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about, as I would soon discover. If only I had acted on my suspicions sooner, I could have spared Lucas so much pain. As the weeks passed, my concerns grew stronger. Lucas now had noticeable light patches on his skin, particularly on his arms and cheeks, where lotion would typically be applied. These patches contrasted sharply with his natural brown skin tone, creating an uneven appearance that couldn't be explained by normal variations. "I think we need to take Lucas to the dermatologist," I told James one evening, showing him the discolored areas. "This doesn't look like normal baby skin issues anymore." James examined our son's skin with a frown. "Could it be eczema? My sister had that as a baby." "The pediatrician didn't think so," I replied. "She specifically asked if someone might be using different products on him." I saw the moment James understood what I was implying. His expression hardened. "If you're suggesting my mother is doing something to hurt Lucas?" "I'm not suggesting anything," I said, though of course I was. "I just want to know why our son's skin is suddenly developing these light patches, and why it's worse on the days your mother watches him." We got an appointment with a pediatric dermatologist who examined Lucas carefully and asked detailed questions about our skincare routine, laundry detergent, and any new products we might be using. "These areas show signs of mild chemical irritation," the doctor explained, pointing to the lighter patches. "It's almost like a mild chemical burn, consistent with certain skin lightening ingredients. Has anyone been applying any unusual products to your baby's skin?" My heart sank as my suspicions were confirmed. James looked shocked, then defensive. "That's impossible," he insisted. "The only people who care for him are us and my mother." The doctor recommended we stop using all products except the ones she prescribed, and to be vigilant about what touched Lucas's skin. On the drive home, James was quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I need to talk to my mother about this," he finally said. "But Charlotte, I know she wouldn't deliberately harm Lucas. There has to be another explanation." I didn't respond. I was too angry, too worried about our son, and too disappointed that James still couldn't see what was happening. That weekend we invited Eleanor for dinner, intending to address our concerns directly. She arrived bearing gifts as usual, a new outfit for Lucas in pale blue, several shades lighter than anything I would have chosen for him. Throughout dinner, Eleanor commented repeatedly on how Lucas seemed to be looking more like James lately, a statement that made my skin crawl given what the dermatologist had told us. After Lucas was put to bed, I brought out the doctor's report. "The dermatologist found evidence of chemical irritation on Lucas's skin," I stated directly. "She's concerned someone might be using skin lightening products on him." Eleanor's face flushed, but she didn't look nearly as shocked as she should have. "That's ridiculous. I only used gentle products on him, the special ones I showed you." "Can we see those products?" James asked, his voice strained, but still giving his mother the benefit of the doubt. Eleanor fumbled through her explanations, claiming the products were all natural traditional remedies that had been used in her family for generations. When pressed, she became defensive. "I don't appreciate being accused like this," she said, rising from the table. "I'm only trying to give Lucas the best care possible." "The best care would be respecting his natural skin color," I shot back, unable to contain my anger any longer. Eleanor froze, then slowly turned to me. What she said next confirmed every fear I had. "I'm only thinking about his future," she said quietly. "Children can be cruel. Life is easier when you fit in, and the truth is the lighter his skin, the easier his life will be." The silence that followed was deafening. James stared at his mother in disbelief. "Mom, are you saying what I think you're saying?" Eleanor faltered, seeming to realize she had said too much. "You're twisting my words. I just want what's best for my grandson." The dinner ended with tension thick enough to cut. Eleanor left in a huff, and James spent the night apologizing, insisting his mother must not understand what she was doing. He promised to speak with her privately to make it clear that whatever products she was using had to stop. I wanted to believe it would be that simple, but the look in Eleanor's eyes had told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate. The next day, I went to our bathroom and gathered every product Eleanor had ever brought for Lucas, intending to research the ingredients. Most were in unmarked containers or had labels that had been partially removed. Suspicious, I took photos of everything and sent them to Aisha, whose sister was a cosmetic chemist. Within hours, Aisha called me back. "Charlotte, one of these contains hydroquinone," she said urgently. "It's a skin bleaching agent that's actually banned for use in children. It's dangerous, especially at the concentration my sister suspects is in this cream." I felt physically ill. This wasn't just Eleanor imposing her beauty standards on my child. This was her actively endangering him with chemicals strong enough to burn his delicate skin. "You need to confront her," Aisha advised. "And honestly, you might want to consider filing a police report. This is child endangerment." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. The camera in Lucas' nursery had been consistently accidentally moved during Eleanor's visits, but I realize now I should have been more persistent in reviewing the footage from the times when it was positioned correctly. That night, I spent hours going through saved videos, my horror growing as I watched Eleanor apply various creams and lotions to Lucas's skin, paying special attention to his face, neck, and arms, the very places where the discoloration was most prominent. In some clips, I could see Lucas squirming uncomfortably as she rubbed the products in, ignoring his distress. When James came home, I showed him the footage and explained what Aisha had told me about hydroquinone. He watched in silence, his face crumpling as the undeniable evidence played before him. "I can't believe this," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "My own mother." "We can't let her watch him anymore," I said firmly. "And honestly, James, I think we need to consider legal action. She's been deliberately applying dangerous chemicals to our baby's skin." James looked torn, caught between his loyalty to his mother and his duty to protect his son. "Let me talk to her first," he pleaded. "Maybe she doesn't understand how harmful these products are." I doubted that was the case, but I agreed to let James speak with his mother before we took more drastic steps. However, I also made a decision of my own. I would work from home the next day, supposedly due to a childcare issue, but actually to monitor Eleanor's behavior through the baby camera app on my phone. It would turn out to be one of the most important decisions I ever made. The next morning, I told Eleanor I had a last-minute work emergency, but would be back by lunch. I kissed Lucas goodbye, gave Eleanor the usual instructions, and pretended to leave. Instead, I drove around the block and parked where I could monitor the baby camera feed on my phone. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Eleanor fed Lucas his breakfast, played with him briefly, and put him down for his morning nap. But when he woke up, that's when things changed. I watched in horror as Eleanor prepared what looked like a bath, adding something from an unmarked bottle to the water. She undressed Lucas and lowered him into the tub. Almost immediately, he began to cry, not his usual fussy cry, but a high-pitched scream of pain. Eleanor shushed him, continuing to splash the water over his shoulders and back. "This is for your own good," I heard her say through the camera's audio. "You'll thank me someday. Nobody wants to be different." Lucas screamed louder, his little arms flailing as the chemical-laden water touched his skin. I could see redness spreading across his brown skin where the water made contact. I didn't even remember driving home. One moment, I was watching the horrific scene on my phone, and the next, I was bursting through our front door, racing to the bathroom, where Lucas' screams guided me. The scene I encountered will haunt me forever. Lucas, my beautiful baby boy, sitting in bathwater that smelled strongly of chemicals. His skin red and irritated, tears streaming down his face as he screamed in pain. And Eleanor, my mother-in-law, calmly pouring more of the noxious solution over his shoulders, seemingly unbothered by his distress. "What are you doing?" I screamed, rushing forward to lift Lucas from the water. He clung to me immediately, his small body shaking with sobs. Eleanor stood up startled, but not nearly as ashamed as she should have been. "Charlotte, I thought you were at work." "What is in this water?" I demanded, grabbing a towel to wrap around Lucas, noting with horror how some areas of his skin were already beginning to blister. For a moment, Eleanor seemed to consider lying. Then her expression hardened. "It's just a diluted bleaching solution," she said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "My grandmother used it on all the children in our family. It helps even out skin tone." "Even out skin tone?" I repeated incredulously. "You're trying to bleach my baby's skin." Eleanor didn't deny it. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked me directly in the eye. "I'm trying to help him. Do you have any idea how much harder his life will be with dark skin? I'm doing him a favor." In that moment, I saw Eleanor clearly for perhaps the first time, all the subtle racism, the discomfort with my blackness, the disappointment when Lucas was born with brown skin rather than white. It had never been about products or gentle remedies. It had been about erasing the part of Lucas that came from me, about making him more acceptable to her world. "Get out!" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house right now." "Don't be dramatic, Charlotte," Eleanor said dismissively. "Every mother wants what's best for their child. Sometimes that means making difficult choices. Lucas will have a much easier life if he fits in." "Fits in?" I was nearly shouting now. "You mean if he looks less black, if he denies half of who he is?" "You know exactly what I mean," Eleanor replied coldly. "The world isn't as progressive as you want to believe. I'm just being practical." I pulled out my phone and called 911, keeping Lucas held tightly against me as I did. "I'm reporting a case of child endangerment," I told the dispatcher, my voice breaking. "My mother-in-law has been applying bleaching chemicals to my infant's skin. He's having a reaction and needs medical attention." Eleanor's face changed, then fear replacing her self-righteousness. "You're calling the police on me. This is ridiculous. I'm his grandmother. A grandmother who just committed a crime," I responded, providing our address to the dispatcher. "You deliberately harmed my child because you couldn't accept his race. That is not love. That is abuse." Everything happened quickly after that. The ambulance arrived first, paramedics gently examining Lucas and confirming he had chemical burns on approximately 20% of his body, mostly first degree, but with some second-degree burns on his shoulders and back, where the solution had been poured directly. The police arrived while the paramedics were still treating Lucas. I provided them with the bottle of bleaching solution Eleanor had used, as well as the collection of skin-lightening creams I'd found hidden in her tote bag. I also showed them the video footage from the baby camera, which clearly captured Eleanor's actions and statements. Eleanor was still protesting her innocence when they placed her in handcuffs, claiming she was only doing what generations of her family had done, that she had Lucas's best interests at heart. The officers were unmoved, particularly after seeing Lucas's injuries and the video evidence. James arrived home just as they were escorting Eleanor to the police car. He had been unreachable during the entire ordeal in an important client meeting, with his phone silenced. The look on his face when he saw his mother in handcuffs, followed by the sight of Lucas being treated by paramedics for chemical burns, was one of absolute devastation. "What happened?" he asked, his voice hollow with shock. "Charlotte, what happened?" I could barely speak through my tears, so one of the police officers explained the situation. James listened in horror, then approached his mother as she was about to be placed in the police car. "Is it true?" he asked simply. Eleanor looked at her son, and for the first time, I saw shame cross her features. "I was trying to help him, James. You know how cruel this world can be." James stepped back as if slapped. "You were trying to erase who he is, who Charlotte is, who I fell in love with." His voice broke. "How could you—" He turned away from her, then coming to my side as we prepared to follow the ambulance to the hospital. Eleanor called his name as the officers put her in the car, but James didn't look back. In that moment, I knew our relationship with Eleanor would never be the same again. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what the paramedics had suspected. Lucas had suffered chemical burns from a home bleaching solution containing sodium hypochlorite and hydroquinone, both dangerous substances to apply to an infant's skin. They treated the burns, prescribed specialized creams to help with healing, and advised us that while Lucas would likely recover fully, we would need to be vigilant about sun protection as the healed areas would be more susceptible to damage. As I sat by Lucas's hospital bed that night, watching him finally sleep peacefully thanks to pain medication, I thought about all the warning signs I had ignored. The comments about his appearance, the mysterious products, the accidentally redirected camera. I had known something was wrong, but had allowed my desire to believe the best of people to maintain family harmony to override my maternal instincts. "I will never let anyone hurt you again," I whispered to my sleeping son. "And I will teach you to love every part of yourself, especially the parts that make you different." James sat on the other side of the bed, his head in his hands. "I should have seen it," he said quietly. "All those comments over the years, the way she looked at you at Lucas. I thought she was just old-fashioned, that she would come around. I never imagined she would do something like this." "We both wanted to believe the best," I replied, reaching across the bed to take his hand. "What happens now?" he asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. Now we protect our son, and we make sure he grows up knowing that his identity is not something to be changed or hidden. It's something to be celebrated. James nodded, squeezing my hand. "I promise you, Charlotte, I will never let anyone, not even my family, make either of you feel less than perfect, exactly as you are." It was a promise he would be tested on sooner than either of us expected. The days following Eleanor's arrest were a blur of hospital visits, police statements, and difficult conversations. Lucas remained in the hospital for 3 days, while doctors monitored his recovery and ensured there would be no lasting damage to his skin or respiratory system from inhaling the chemical fumes. During this time, news of what had happened spread through both our families and the local community. My parents arrived from Philadelphia, bringing comfort food children's books featuring diverse characters and their unwavering support. "We knew that woman was trouble from the day we met her," my mother said as she gently applied the prescribed cream to Lucas's healing skin. "But we never imagined she'd go this far." James's family, on the other hand, had splintered into factions. His younger sister Megan came to the hospital horrified by what her mother had done and offering her full support. But his older brother Thomas and Father Richard rallied behind Eleanor, insisting there must have been a misunderstanding. "Mom would never deliberately hurt Lucas," Thomas argued when he confronted James in the hospital corridor. "She's old school, sure, but this has to be a mistake." "I saw the video," James replied, his voice hard. "I saw what she did to my son. There's no misunderstanding." Richard called later that evening, his voice tight with anger. "Your mother is sitting in a jail cell because of your wife's overreaction. Those old home remedies might not be fashionable anymore, but they're hardly child abuse." James had put the phone on speaker so I could hear, and I couldn't stay silent at that. "Those old home remedies gave my son second-degree chemical burns," I said. "The doctors have confirmed it was a dangerous concentration of bleaching agents that should never be used on children or adults for that matter." "Well, if you'd been watching your own child instead of pawning him off on Eleanor, none of this would have happened," Richard retorted. James ended the call, then his hands shaking with anger. "I can't believe they're defending her," he said. "I can't believe they don't see how wrong this was." But the division in his family was just the beginning. As Lucas was discharged and we brought him home, we discovered the story had been picked up by local news. A neighbor had recorded Eleanor being led away in handcuffs and shared the video online, with a sensationalized caption about a grandmother being arrested for traditional childcare practices. The story quickly morphed into a lightning rod for discussions about race parenting and cultural differences. Some commenters defended Eleanor, claiming older generations had different standards and should be forgiven for not understanding modern sensitivities. Others recognized the incident for what it was, a disturbing manifestation of colorism and racism. My phone began filling with messages from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers who had heard the story. Some offered support and shared similar experiences with family members who had shown racial bias toward their children. Others criticized me for involving the police, suggesting I should have handled the matter privately for the sake of the family. Through it all, I focused on Lucas and his recovery. The burns were healing well, but he had become more withdrawn, crying whenever anyone but James or I approached him. The pediatric psychologist we consulted assured us that at his age, the emotional impact would likely fade as the physical wounds healed. But it broke my heart to see my once trusting, happy baby, now fearful of others. Aisha was a lifeline during this period. She came over with meals, helped with household tasks, and most importantly, connected me with a support group for families dealing with racial identity issues. Through this group, I met other parents of multiracial children who had faced similar, if usually less extreme, situations, with relatives unable to embrace their children's complete identity. "What Eleanor did was criminal," said Daphne, a mother with biracial twins, during one support group meeting. "But the attitudes behind it are something many of us face every day. The relatives who always comment on which parent the child looks more like. The suggestions about straightening hair or staying out of the sun. The subtle and not so subtle preference for features that read as more white." These conversations helped me process what had happened and strengthen my resolve to create an environment where Lucas would grow up proud of every aspect of his heritage. I began researching children's books, toys, and media that positively represented children who looked like him. I reached out to other multiracial families in our community to build a support network. Meanwhile, Eleanor's case moved through the legal system. She was formally charged with child endangerment assault and illegal use of prohibited skin bleaching agents. Her attorney attempted to frame the incident as a cultural misunderstanding, a grandmother using old-fashioned remedies without realizing their potential harm. The prosecutor, a Black woman with grown children of her own, wasn't having it. "The defendant's actions were not misguided love," she stated in court. "They were a deliberate attempt to chemically alter a child's racial appearance, causing physical pain and potential lasting damage in the process. This is not a cultural practice. It's racism made manifest in child abuse." Eleanor was released on bail after 3 days in custody, with conditions including no contact with Lucas or me and limited supervised contact with James if he chose to maintain a relationship with her. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. During this time, James struggled with his own feelings of guilt and betrayal. He attended therapy sessions both alone and with me, working through his shock at discovering the depth of his mother's racial prejudice and his own blindness to it over the years. "I keep thinking about all the little comments she made while we were dating after we got married during your pregnancy," he confessed during one session. "I dismissed them as generational, as her being socially awkward. But they were all breadcrumbs leading to this moment, weren't they?" "We both wanted to believe the best of her," I reminded him. "And James, most people don't jump from making insensitive comments to committing assault. What your mother did goes beyond casual racism. It was calculated and persistent." As Eleanor's court date approached, the pressure from James's family intensified. Thomas called daily, alternating between guilting James about abandoning their mother and trying to convince him to persuade me to drop the charges. "The publicity alone is punishment enough," he argued. "Do you really want Lucas to grow up knowing his grandmother went to prison because of him?" "She went to prison because of her own actions," James countered. "And I want Lucas to grow up knowing we protected him, that we stood up against anyone who tried to harm him, even family." Richard's attempts were more direct. He showed up at our house unannounced one evening, demanding to speak with me personally. "Name your price," he said when James reluctantly let him in. "Whatever it takes for you to drop these ridiculous charges. This is family business, not something for the courts." I stood my ground, Lucas held protectively in my arms. "There is no price for my son's safety and dignity. What Eleanor did was not family business, it was a crime, and she needs to be held accountable." Richard left in anger, warning that we would regret tearing the family apart. James was shaken but resolute. "If protecting our son tears apart a family built on racism, then it wasn't much of a family to begin with," he said after his father left. The night before Eleanor's hearing, I lay awake, thinking about what I would say if given the chance to address the court. How could I convey the magnitude of what had been done, not just the physical harm to Lucas, but the deeper message that his natural appearance, his racial identity, was something to be corrected rather than celebrated? In the darkness, James reached for my hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he whispered, "know that Lucas and I are so lucky to have you. You fought for him when I was still in denial. You protected him when my own family wouldn't." I squeezed his hand back, grateful for his support, but still carrying the weight of what lay ahead. The following day would mark a turning point, not just in Eleanor's fate, but in our family's journey toward healing and reclaiming our sense of safety. The courthouse was intimidating, a towering structure of cold stone and echoing hallways. We arrived early, following our attorney's advice to avoid the small crowd of reporters who had gathered outside, drawn by the unusual nature of the case. Lucas was being cared for by my parents, sparing him the stress of the proceedings and shielding him from the public scrutiny that had already touched our lives too deeply. I carried a photo of him in my pocket, a reminder of why we were there, of what was at stake. Eleanor arrived with Richard Thomas and her attorney, a distinguished-looking older man who specialized in family disputes. She looked smaller somehow, her normally perfect appearance, slightly disheveled dark circles visible beneath her eyes despite her makeup. When she saw James, she stepped toward him, but the bailiff intervened, reminding her of the no-contact order. The courtroom filled quickly with legal personnel, family members from both sides, and several people I recognized from the support group for multiracial families who had come to show solidarity. Aisha sat directly behind me, her presence a comforting anchor. The proceedings began with the formal reading of charges. Eleanor sat impassively as the prosecutor detailed the evidence against her. The camera footage, the doctor's reports confirming chemical burns, the collection of illegal skin lightening products found in her possession, and my testimony about the pattern of concerning behavior that had preceded the bathtub incident. When it came time for Eleanor to enter her plea, her attorney advised her to plead not guilty, arguing for dismissal based on a grandmother's misguided but well-intentioned actions. The judge denied the motion to dismiss, citing the substantial evidence and severity of Lucas's injuries. What followed was a preliminary presentation of evidence that would determine whether the case would proceed to trial. The prosecutor played selected clips from the nursery camera, including the devastating footage from the day of Eleanor's arrest. Watching it again in the formal setting of the courtroom, surrounded by strangers, was even more painful than I had anticipated. The most damning evidence, however, came from Eleanor's own words. The prosecutor played audio from the police interview conducted after her arrest, in which Eleanor had been surprisingly forthcoming about her motivations. "I was trying to give him advantages his mother can't understand," Eleanor's voice echoed through the courtroom. "The lighter his skin, the better his opportunities. It's just reality." When asked if she knew the products could harm Lucas, her recorded response was equally disturbing. "Sometimes there's discomfort in the short term for long-term benefit. Beauty treatments often sting a little." By the time the prosecutor finished presenting the evidence, there wasn't a person in the courtroom who could reasonably doubt Eleanor's guilt. The judge ruled that the case would proceed to trial, but then something unexpected happened. After a whispered conference with her attorney, Eleanor changed her plea to guilty. "My client wishes to spare her family the pain of a prolonged trial," her attorney announced. "She admits to her actions but asks the court to consider her age, her previously unblemished record, and her sincere belief that she was acting in her grandson's best interests." The judge accepted the guilty plea, but made it clear that Eleanor's sincere beliefs were no excuse for her actions. "The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Mrs. Parker," he said sternly. "And regardless of your motivations, you caused serious harm to a vulnerable child placed in your care." Before proceeding to sentencing, the judge asked if I would like to make a victim impact statement. I had prepared for this possibility, but still felt my heart racing as I approached the podium. Looking directly at Eleanor for the first time since the incident, I took a deep breath and began to speak. 8 months ago, I gave birth to a perfect baby boy. Lucas has my brown skin, his father's green eyes, and a smile that can light up a room. From the moment he was born, I knew my most important job was to protect him from a world that might try to make him feel less than because of the color of his skin. My voice shook slightly, but I pressed on. I never imagined that the first person I would need to protect him from would be his own grandmother. Eleanor Parker didn't just cause physical pain to my son with her actions. She tried to teach him before he could even speak that his natural appearance was something shameful, something to be corrected. That half of his identity, the half that comes from me and my family, was a burden to be lightened literally. I glanced at the photo of Lucas I had brought with me. The physical wounds are healing, but I cannot calculate the emotional damage that might have been done if this behavior had continued, if Lucas had grown up absorbing the message that his brown skin made him less valuable, less lovable, less worthy of respect. Looking directly at Eleanor again, I continued, I do not believe Eleanor Parker's actions were motivated by love. Love accepts, love celebrates, love protects. What she did was about control, about erasing what made her uncomfortable, about prioritizing her own prejudices over my son's well-being. I am not here seeking vengeance, I concluded. I am here seeking justice and protection for my child, and for all children who deserve to grow up proud of their heritage, whatever it may be. I asked the court to send a message that attempting to erase a child's racial identity is not an act of love, it is an act of violence. As I returned to my seat, I felt James's hand find mine, squeezing tightly in silent support. The judge then asked if Eleanor wished to address the court before sentencing. Eleanor rose slowly, her hands visibly trembling. I never meant to hurt Lucas, she began, her voice thin and wavering. I love my grandson. I only wanted to give him advantages in a world that can be cruel to those who are different. She paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. I grew up in a different time, she continued. Where I come from, where I was raised, things like skin color matter, whether we want them to or not. I thought I was helping him. She looked toward James, tears in her eyes. I've lost my son and my grandson. Isn't that punishment enough? The judge was unmoved. Mrs. Parker, your actions were not misguided love. They were assault on a child motivated by racial prejudice. The court cannot ignore the deliberate and repeated nature of your behavior, nor the harm it caused. The sentence came down 18 months in prison with the possibility of parole after 6 months mandatory counseling focusing on racial bias and a permanent restraining order preventing Eleanor from having any unsupervised contact with Lucas until he reached the age of 18. As the bailiff led Eleanor away, she looked back one last time at James, who had risen to his feet. The pain on both their faces spoke volumes about the family bonds that had been irreparably damaged by her actions. Outside the courthouse, away from the reporters, James finally broke down. I keep thinking about what she said about growing up in a different time, he said between ragged breaths, as if that excuses it, as if that makes it okay to hurt our son. I held him as he cried, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. There was relief that justice had been served, sorrow for the family relationships that had been destroyed, and most of all, a fierce determination that Lucas would grow up surrounded by people who celebrated every aspect of his identity. We can't change where she comes from, I told James gently. But we can change where Lucas comes from. We can give him a foundation of love and acceptance so strong that no one will ever make him question his worth. As we drove home to our son, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of our fight to create a world where Lucas could thrive proud of every part of himself. The aftermath of Eleanor's sentencing created ripples that extended far beyond our immediate family. James's father, Richard, filed for divorce, unable to reconcile with the woman who had brought such shame upon their family name. Thomas eventually came to understand the gravity of what his mother had done, especially after his wife became pregnant with their first child, and he began to view parental responsibilities through a new lens. For us, the months following the trial were focused on healing. Lucas's physical wounds, healing our own emotional scars, and healing our sense of security that had been so profoundly violated. Lucas made a full physical recovery, the burns fading to faint marks that the doctors assured us would likely disappear completely as he grew. More concerning was his lingering fear of water and strangers, particularly older women who resembled Eleanor. We worked with a pediatric therapist who specialized in infant trauma, introducing gentle water play, and carefully managed interactions to help him overcome these fears. Babies are remarkably resilient, Dr. Fernandez explained during one session. With consistent love and safety, Lucas will likely have no conscious memory of these events. But it's still important to address the reactions his body remembers, even if his mind doesn't. James threw himself into educating himself about race and identity. He read books, attended workshops, and joined discussion groups for white parents of biracial children. I watched him confront his own internalized biases and blind spots, painful as that process was. I never thought of myself as someone who would tolerate racism, he confessed one night. But I did, didn't I? All those little comments from my mother, all those microaggressions I dismissed because it was easier than confronting them. We all have blind spots, I told him. What matters is that you're seeing clearly now. Our marriage, tested by the trauma we had experienced, emerged stronger. James had chosen Lucas and me over the family narratives he had been raised with, proving that love could indeed triumph over the prejudices embedded in his upbringing. 3 months after the sentencing, we decided to move. The media attention had eventually died down, but our neighborhood felt tainted by memories and whispers. We chose a diverse community with excellent schools where Lucas would see families that looked like ours and have friends from many different backgrounds. Our new home became a gathering place for the support group I had joined, hosting monthly potlucks where parents of multiracial children shared stories, advice, and encouragement. These gatherings became a source of strength and joy, creating the extended family we needed. You've turned your pain into purpose, Aisha observed during one such gathering, watching Lucas play with the other children, his laughter now uninhibited and free. That's a powerful legacy to give him. Around this time, I started a blog documenting our journey, sharing resources for multicultural families and our experiences navigating the complexities of raising a child with multiple racial identities. What began as personal therapy became a lifeline for others facing similar challenges, and eventually led to opportunities to speak at parenting conferences and educational institutions about protecting children from racial bias. 6 months into her sentence, Eleanor became eligible for parole. She had completed the required counseling and, according to her parole officer, had shown genuine remorse and understanding of the harm she had caused. She requested a meeting with James, which he agreed to with significant trepidation. He returned from that meeting with mixed emotions. She seems different, he said. The counseling has helped her recognize her prejudices, but I don't know if someone can truly change beliefs they've held for a lifetime. Eleanor had asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation, of being allowed back into Lucas's life under supervision. James had told her honestly that while he was working toward forgiveness, trust was a different matter entirely. I told her that protecting Lucas will always be my priority, he explained to me, and that means being absolutely certain that anyone in his life values and respects every part of who he is. Eleanor accepted this answer with more grace than I would have expected. She continued her counseling after release, eventually joining a community group focused on confronting racial bias among older generations. She sent cards on Lucas's birthday and Christmas, which we acknowledged, but did not reciprocate beyond a brief thank you message. The restraining order remained in place, a legal boundary that reflected the emotional one we still needed. Perhaps someday, when Lucas was older and could understand the complexities of the situation, there might be room for a carefully managed relationship. But for now, distance was our form of protection. As for Lucas, he continued to thrive. By his second birthday, he was a happy, confident toddler with no visible scars from his ordeal. He loved books about children from different cultures, pointed proudly to characters who had brown skin like his, and was equally delighted by stories about his father's Scottish ancestors and my family's roots in Ghana and Louisiana. We made sure he grew up knowing both sides of his heritage, celebrating diverse holidays and traditions, and surrounding him with positive role models who reflected the beautiful blend of cultures he embodied. James's sister Megan became a beloved aunt who showered Lucas with affection and respect, proving that family bonds could be rebuilt on healthier foundations. On the anniversary of what we had come to call the incident, James and I sat on our back porch after Lucas had gone to bed, reflecting on how far we had come. I never could have imagined that day would lead us here, James said, gesturing to our new home, the life we had built. As horrible as it was, it forced us to confront things we might have continued to ignore or excuse. That's the thing about racism, I replied. It doesn't go away when we pretend not to see it. It festers and grows in that darkness. Bringing it into the light is painful, but it's the only way to begin healing. James took my hand, his expression serious. I make this promise to you and Lucas every day, but I'll say it again. I will never stop learning, never stop working to be the husband and father you both deserve. I will never let either of you stand alone against prejudice, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it comes from people I love. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words. And I promise to keep building a world where Lucas never questions his worth, where he knows that his identity is not something to hide or change, but something to celebrate. As we sat there in the gathering dusk, I thought about the journey ahead. Lucas would face challenges we couldn't protect him from entirely. The world was not yet the equitable place we wished it to be. But he would face those challenges knowing he was deeply loved, knowing his parents had fought for his right to be exactly who he was, and knowing that protecting him wasn't just about keeping him safe. It was about teaching him to stand tall in his truth. I have learned that protection is love in action. It isn't always comfortable or easy. Sometimes it means setting boundaries with people we care about. Sometimes it means confronting painful realities we would rather ignore. Sometimes it means legal battles and public scrutiny and rebuilding a life from the broken pieces of what came before. But always, always, it means sending our children the message that they are worthy of that protection exactly as they are, that no aspect of their identity is a burden or a flaw, that the very things others might try to change about them may be their greatest strengths. Lucas now runs to the bath with joy splashing and playing without fear. He approaches life with an openness and confidence that amazes me every day. And when he looks in the mirror, he smiles at his reflection, touching his brown skin and green eyes with equal delight. "That's me," he announces proudly. "Yes, my beautiful boy. That is you, perfect in every way." Have you ever had to protect someone you love from prejudice or harmful beliefs, even when it came from family? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with others who might need to hear that. Standing up for what's right, especially when it comes to protecting our children, is always worth it. Thank you for listening, and remember, our differences aren't flaws to be fixed. They're gifts to be celebrated.